Chapter 1 of Mr. Wicker's Window. Recording by Vicky. Wicker's Window by Carly Dawson. Chapter 1. Christopher Mason felt numb. It seemed to him that he was as good as an orphan already for his father. A commander in the Navy was far away at sea, and Chris's mother was in a hospital, not expected to live. Chris scuffed along the brick pavements of Georgetown, but he did not, as they usually did, look about at its familiar houses. This friendly core of the growing city of Washington, D.C. Today seemed to him almost hostile. Georgetown, where Chris lived, is the oldest part of the capital city, built by early English settlers. Long years before Washington itself was even planned, grouped at the head of the navigable part of the Potomac River above Georgetown's bluffs, the Potomac foams and dashes over wild rocks and waterfalls and across the river. The country starts. Chris had just left his mother's sister. His aunt, Rachel, white-faced, was preparing to go to the hospital to be with his mother. And it asked him, "Don't you want to come to Chris for a little while?" But a cold-edged wing of fear had brushed the boy like a bat wing in the night. He had shaken his head. Speechless, grabbed his sweater and slammed the front door. Now he hesitated on a corner, suddenly dismayed, not knowing quite where to go, what to do. The whole city, with its white marble buildings and temples, memorials, its elm-lined avenues, seemed all at once very empty. He looked down to the Potomac, always for Chris, just the river where it glinted distantly blue and silver at the end of the street. Factories along the river bank cut off all but the farthest stretches of water as the river moved under bridge after bridge. Beside the banks of Maryland and Virginia, Chris made up his mind to see what might be in the Pet Boys store far down the hill. Long traffic filled M Street. Somehow the tawdry bustle street, with this many shops, to the boy who carried misery inside him like a cold, heavy stone running. He started down the hill between the lines of old brick houses, left Rock Creek Park behind him, and turning to the right up M Street, reached the hardware glitter of the Pet Boys. And it was there, as he said, staring at the chromium bicycle lamps, red glass tail lights, and wire baskets, that Mike Dugan found him. End of Chapter 1, recording by Vicky. Chapter 2, Mr. Wicker's Window. Mr. Wicker's Window by Carlitos. Chapter 2, My Cousin is Classic Public School Dates. Cade. Mike was alive. Chris liked him. "Hey, Chris," he Mike. "What? You're doing?" "Nothing much. Just looking." "Say, you know something?" Mike weakly himself, because part of Pep Boys swindled again. "Cause attention, or Trick has got a sinus window. He needs a boy for after school. I guess think it'd be her." "I know, Pie." Chris looked from a nickel-plated flashlight to a car check-in spark plug. "Oh, I don't know," Mike persisted. "Well, I tell you what, Nova needs truck bed. It's check your house. His mother's sick and he's got the bed foot. I not ask him her to sit next to me. It's or concert. Was needs a truck bed by the sick." "Okay," he said, "only why didn't you ask him yourself?" Mike became uneasy and fished an elastic pen out of his pocket with the flick of paper and sent it swing into M State. "Well," he admitted, "I did, because such a career guy. An authentic shop is dark and spooky." And bell and went in, and there wasn't nobody there, only him and me makes talk. And after post, Chris said, "So what?" So Mike swallowed. "So I said, I was there about the chop until, you know what he said." He said, he went on researching. What was the fall of perplexity like in his forehead? He said, "10 hound. You look out the window, son, tell me what you see." Like stopped and looked at closely as a comical expression. "Everybody knows what's outside his window." He burst out of all the silly things, but the turn hound, and looked like he told me to. And of course there was the traffic going by, toxic caps. The people crossing this plate, and we overhead, and you know. So what did he say? 'Cause I asked, and for the first time that day, the heavyweight he carried with him lifted and flattened the little like X amount. The tore is one shoe. Oh, he just smiled, that funny little tightly smile, and said, "I'm sorry, young man. You want to?" For a moment both boys stared into each other's eyes, each questioning, wondering, neither being able to supply the answer. At last, Chris broke the silence. "The other thing I ever heard, Chief, what do you suppose Mike took apart? His experience. Believed in this peppermint chap." He spoke cheerfully. "It doesn't make sense, but inaudible adult. Who else would keep an antique store? But nobody ever looks all the other antique places along Wisconsin Avenue. But people go to shop. You check your helicopter, use the job." Chris asked this courage. "I think I picture to himself the dark little shop visits, both in of small paints, Mr. Inaudible. He seemed only bones and hypers think he really needs it. He posts." But Mike was certain. Perhaps he needed a companion in this curious experiment. "You bet it is. He told me at noon today, he wished he could find something that would help bring some money in. His mother's sick. You repeat it and check it on Fox. So cook himself." Belper said, "Half a clean I'll go with here." Mike announced. If that finished your argument, which as a matter affected, did trusted not feel too happy about this mission and hung back a moment longer looking in the Pep Boys window at things he don't hide the scene. He would have liked to get the truck for checking needed it, but somehow the task of facing Mr. Baker, especially now that the light was going and task etching into the plates, was not what Chris had intended for an India afternoon. Although he had not been quite certain how it meant to spend the rest of the remaining daylight. I explained did not seem to fit his present mood. Are you coming? Like challenged with a hint of direction. Yes, because suddenly I'm coming. I asked her. Jackie, my expression changed once to one of time, but close was only partly encouraged. The two boys walked to the corner of Amsterdam and Wisconsin Avenue, perfectly caught up the first truck block of Wisconsin from under the highest point freeway down to the left place. Glance down the slope of Wisconsin, house and shops, and suddenly on both sides of the state, far down, the very end on his side could see the pike, was and slate of Mr. Baker's house. First knew. Well, 4 times to said number, he had placed his nose to the inaudible paints of Mr. Inaudible window to case at this place, your fascinating tremble of automates that were displayed now. However, he felt it normal to visit the curiosity shop and stood, shifting his feet and looking aimlessly about. Mike beside him was becoming a high stiff and gave him a poke. But you aren't going after door has turned on him. I am too. My club is staying for all your styling. Not any such a thing. I'm going now. Okay. Let's see you. Let's turn this back on Mike and started down the hill after step or two, but finding his friend beside him, he turned. Micro standing on the corner. Hi, Inaudible, you said you were coming with me. Bella was my pick, but I just remembered my mother told me to bring her some stuff from Safeway and hand all the way and come back and meet you. Oh, shucks. Please kick the non-existent Pepper. It's called, but the two of us a chore. It was never a first discussion. I'll meet you in 15 or 20 minutes. Mike shouted. It won't take me long, and swing our 2 cents to signify that there was nothing he could do about it. He disappeared because started off at once person to play Little Victorian Church porched on the helipad. Mr. Baker's house and interlock cut into the church lane, give a look of isolation to the L-shaped big building that served Mr. Baker, suppose house in place of business. I suppose to look below him, even from he stood 50 feet above the house, the slope to the hell of a sharp, the plan of the house below him could be plainly seen. It was burst like an inverted L, the short thing facing towards this plate and the task of this continent avenue. The long living toward the back, hid the back door that opened onto the street. The space between the house and Wisconsin Avenue had been made in tiny oblong flower garden, fenced off from the sidewalk, the box shops in the white picket fence behind it, along the other side of the long ring lay and meticulously arranged, stretched to regard. And then the few apple trees, his case back to the house itself. It seemed to have been built at about the same time as the vacant storehouses opposite. So they had the similar look of design and age, the windows of Mr. Inaudible house. Its smaller panes of glass than they used nowadays. And like the beer houses across from it. Mr. Wick has had many dome of windows jutting out from the slanted collect the warehouses. However, Inaudible, Mr. Wicker's home was well cared for. The windows, except for the probing of the shop to the height of the front door, had shut this painted the policing blue plane and that their sides could be seen. The edges of KKR. The traffic freely was high above the hoof fiving, the old house, and casting a deepening shadow over the whole length of the street shaving. Even Mr. Vicar Spectre, so close to the ties beside the house, the Evers felt his mechanical sounds, the horror of cars speeding up the hill. They kind of gifts the shadowing swiper feels along the freeway, the clanking bang of chains and fights the factories along the shore. The sand was topping. And this guy behind, because medicine is the promise for the following day, live at Yellowstone into her eyes and beyond the sector is in loud, slower than tumbled above. Yeah, was going chillin'. Chris decided to finish his job all at once. He found that house, mother, boss and everything in him pinched and tightened itself at the foot of the hill. He reached the house as he came to the bowl from the old familiar excitement. That always says because when he looked at Mr. Because window touched him again and he stopped to look at its very memorized display for as long as he had stopped back to look into Mr. Because window, which was as far back as he could remember, cause it never known the objects to variably changed. Diversely things that always caught his eye, Inaudible, that's the pieces on the left, the call of hope in the center, the model of a sailing ship, the king class bottle. And on the height, the witness that you have a nickel point back at houses, Turkish, check it into a turbine. The figure was holding up before wooden bouquet of yellow paint peeling from the calf flowers, she goes, smells was open and engaging to smile. It's high tense or someone hit on the cheap type paint of the back of houses. The ship so often contemplated because the teeny tiny side, inaudible, sleeker flying painted at one time, it says thing right now that's telling the train size of the bottle. It says, looked loose. Its side scored, but the name's there, shoulder DePaul, and many a time safe at home in bed to mention a voyage, the Mirabelle it laid there, that it captured as if at the bottom of a topic heresy since what a class size of the bottle. And Chris never tired of looking at it, but perhaps the call of hope so meaningless. So meaningful health is imagination by even taller hold. Why a qualified opening antique shop who'd wanted people bought hope in a hardware store. And there was one father alone M Street, or to certainly to see it. But here in an antique shop has shook his head. This is that. It never seen anyone go into Mr. Baker's shop. Now he's thought of it. How then did he live ever sell the 7K horn booking from his claim? He looked up seeing for the first time, the smoke cat hung its eye leveling the window in a beautiful script, such as Cos had never seen before, but very legible. The carpet boy could pay West Virginia Chicky Harris came back into Chris' souls. He looked over his shoulder at the darkening sky. Like, inaudible, multi-step take the high up at the loft of the warehouse opposite and put his hand on the door and up the last flicker of light scattered across the steam sides of the freeway to pick up the lettering above the shop window, WLLM Becker Curiosity Cause opened the door in the barrel. Charlie, very faintly, but his persistence 5'8", and some distant part of the house. End of chapter 2, I cried in early August 2009. Check the sleep Mr. Inaudible window. Jangly think I said of the many times he had examined Mr. because when the pod or the hope that she put the Novan boy had never gone into Mr. Wicker's shop. So now alone, until someone would answer the bell, he looked equally if and easily hound him for this divine window, the outside the lone, they are shocked for Samba to see losing, to close above his head. Heavy hinge on beams posted from one side to the other, a few, the pieces of furniture to the Pope by the first sale of a use. Chris could not determine and almost in the black shadows at the far end of what appeared to be boxes and base piped one upon the other. They coined silence. Now the bell had stopped because the chain made it so fast in his feet and spied hyperly over his body so that he gave a convulsive shiver. He was about to turn and go out. Then at the end of the gloomy shop, a small-time loss of flight set for a little way along the floor. And the door opened fascinated because there is into its distant palace that the short and remarkably spider, I figure for men, Mr. Victor, Speck being taught the Swiss of flight. Chris could not see his face. The figure past was the fighter Hans, Cassie, bigger than that of a child on the door handle. And thank him for that. The silence Chris noticed was still on poke. Mr. Leakey advanced toward him in case shattered again, stood waiting and watching, but it was rescored of his fear and to whom he was indeed very think. And then it would have been hard to say. I missed the wicket canvas in a few feet of case, the final vestiges of daylight from outside, which the extraordinary men facing the boy. And for the first time, Chris was able to remind the old man who was more legend than facts, hot charge term billion, because face itself was not forbidding. What made an eye see mouse into the lengths of Chris' spine was the passion of enormous age. And the parents of the man of haunting him, the thin lips, inaudible cheeks and the ghost book at once being a smile, the nose once hawk-like part and to know things of character and purpose was now pinched by the ever-tightening fingers of application of years. The topper fence of minute twinkle spike and from icon to temper joining restores of the cheekbones with two horizontal lines, it cost the dome for her little tufts of fight fast above the ears all the time. I didn't want that experience here, but what inaudible case for the ordnance eyes, Mr. Vicker's eyes for the toes of an old man or the head, the vicar of the men in the prime of life and the persons in the pocket face of age, which confronted case was horribly disconcerting. Let's blink. That looked again. Yes, they were still there. I deeply pounded my tougher bean black, but the clear sparkling and vista decided a few men mischief while the boy had been too frightened to move at the sight of Mr. because ancient cheeks and pinched nose and tell his head, he wasn't colored by the finely eyes. Chris could not help but like those eyes, even though it was hard to believe they belonged to the man before him. It's still from a distance. Mr. Lucas was kent with youth and this tool is difficult to cry that they are not 4 feet in front of him was the word shopkeeper. And yet the high seen voice by Def come from anywhere else to have those to whom you want the light to her anywhere. Barely. My boy, you wanted something cause swallowed and his voice came back to him. Yes, sir. He said, I saw your sign and annoy a boy who needs a chop. He looked at Mr. Baker, saw him able to look elsewhere. He's a schoolmate of mine. Check your head as his name is. And he really needs the job. I found that Mr. because I was laughing at him, just a little confused because they begin to stammer. I trust one. That is, the place was still open. Mr. Vicar started course for a moment or two, before he applied. What he saw was a fresh ticklet or for certain study. Sincerely 10. Could you imagine his face, something sensitive and appealing about his eyes? His chin chilled obstinate, Tennessee, his nose would shape itself. Fallacy, colder, unholy. Tony here. I was blown in half in equity in his hands. Even the youngest, he was sure the Chilton's plank said, Mr. Baker in this remote smile potent, but his eyes sparkly. It was the bombs of a fire on a winter's night. Yes. The chop is still oatmeal, man. But while you're here, why not apply for it yourself? Because somewhat less. Ilities not to get his message out, shift his feet and gave his sort of laugh all. No, thank you, sir. You'll see. I don't really need it and check it as it wouldn't be fair for me to take it. If Check highly has a chance, he looked away and saw that the light from the distant homeless champion flickering on the shadow tours. He guessed there must be a lively fire in the home beyond, of course, cause editor, anxiously. I don't know what the chop is. You don't see on the side and Check isn't awfully. Well, he has a twisted foot and it makes him slow. Invoking. What did interfere with Check is getting the job, sir. Can I say quiet then apply for slowing coming? Cause her 50 votes have been spoken, but before him, but a black outline because there stood, if it is very clear software clear, devout sounded it would not interfere Christopher, my boy, but now that you are here, you must take the test checky or be cared for never fear or mostly seen the time. Cause felt an atmosphere trenching him, still a powerful scent here. He said swim a little. And he realized that it was a long time since he had that lunch. He salted attached the pleasant smell of herbs like the potbelly. His mother had him born in the house. The sharp-like outline of Mr. V came past itself on his eyeballs and the whole not totally dark except for the light that's playing from the 5/8 open door. Mr. Inaudible. Edge, like carbon paper held up to the sun, the voice at his ear, Inaudible, will you make the test for boy now, just turn around and tell me what you see at moving though twice. In spite of the spleen, she slicing about him like mist. I remembered very validly outside the window, but even this has slowly turned the salt PST's mind. Why had you not seen the reflection of the headlights of the cars pulling up behind the corner for the straight up the hill toward the traffic signals and by the sound of fields of gears and the fonts into completely muffled out to homes and overly stale? Then in that second, he turned and faced about divide both in the first year before him this way objects like best choice Foster in the moonlight to put in from a cost of water, the cost of water. It was the flavor. It was no longer there. Nor at the high was and smokestacks effect to be seen. The warehouse's festival there. The very, very same for Chris put makeup dimension tackle, head, notice the sea open the door. But instead of factories, instead of the freeways, they have a flickered server on the moon. How is it? Masters of complex ships spoke the status. Flabbergasted and priceless. Chris was unaware that he had moved closer to pee out the window in every direction. We were like pick signs, no land plates going as fast and to with left and leaning forward. Chris looked up to and slid by the people stock starts to look but half an hour before host to host of what was tension in the courtyard for space led by flying torture to showing a swinging sign hung on the post. The post was planted at the edge of what was now pod and mother hold. Even as Chris, that not knowing that to believe for this, I saw not, there was a crates on the falls and the cracking whip, it cultures. It stopped piled high. The sluggage stamped to hot beside deflect courtyard, inaudible to hold the team of horses, steaming into court, air pink boys carrying torches and orange lanterns. I know to help travelers in the coachman when the creatures and the cocaine had two packages on their shoes, the four back coats were slightly lifted on the left by the tips of the hypers in the front, the fight lays a muslin 500, the next onto second base coats. They moved in the cold travel of, to the stable before the window had somber by and instead of that all kind of touchstone town plus could only see a few changes against the status in many lofty place. But do you see boy asked the voice of Chandler this year. 'Cause fighting the dumbfounded took his head. I will tell you, Mr. Victor said, my window has a power for those few are to see you're looking back into the past, my boat the way it used to be. Then the coordinates, this plane, the flattening of the light was too much focus. Blackness descended on him as if it had been talked over his head. But before he was quite gone, he heard what you saw. It was Mr. Because voicing kindly he will do end of chapter sleep. I caught him by early August 2009. Chapter 4 of Mr. Wicker's Window. Recording by Vicky. Mr. Wicker's Window by Carly Dawson, Chapter 4. When Chris came to himself, he woke from sleep and lay for a moment without opening his eyes. He waited with his usual sense of irritation for Aunt Rachel, step at the door and her voice saying, "Get up Chris, you're late again," but the step did not come and feeling rested and hungry. Chris opened his eyes. What was this? The high rectangular walls of his bedroom were not around him nor the familiar furniture. Chris sat up rubbing at his eyes as if this would help to clear his vision and looked about him. He was in a narrow bed in a small sunny room, an attic room. It would seem to be, for the walls slanted down in different sharp angles from the low ceiling to the broad wood planks of the floor. The two dormer windows projected from the room beyond the roof, making two niches in the wall across from where Chris lay, and a third window in the wall above his head showed that the room, as well as being at the top of the house, was also at a corner of it. A door was just beyond the foot of the bed, a chest of drawers and a table with a blue and white porcelain washbowl and pitcher stood along the farther side. Wooden pegs were placed at hand level here and there, and a rug and bright colors lay on the floor by the bed. The walls were white, and the sunlight poured in to dash itself up on the floor and splash up the walls in an irresistible gaiety. There was no doubt about it. Bare though it was a pleasing room, snug, clean and cheerful, and somehow well suited to a 13-year-old boy. Chris half smiled as he looked, leaning on one elbow, and then his smile faded as he caught sight of the chair. And what it held, the only chair in the room, was laid with carefully folded clothes, but they were not Chris's clothes. Chris jumped out of bed and then looked down with a quick startled intake of his breath. He was wearing a white nightshirt, something he had never even seen before, and barely heard of. The sleeves were long and cuffed, and the nightshirt fell in linen lines to his feet. "Golly, Moses," Chris exclaimed, completely baffled. He returned to the examination of the clothes that were obviously laid out for him. There was a fine white shirt with full sleeves and turned back cuffs, white cotton stockings, knee breeches of a blue-gray worsted material, and matching frock coat with silver carved buttons below the chair. Chris saw was a pair of black leather shoes with polished silver buckles. "Fancy dress, huh?" Chris murmured. And then, as if he had been slapped into full awareness, came the remembrance of the evening before, of Mr. Wicker, and of the dark flickering shop. Chris sat down suddenly on the edge of the bed, his mouth, in spite of all his efforts, drawn down at the corners and his eyes blank with confusion and misery. "Oh my golly," Chris said, and stared at the clothes he still held in his hands. Then another idea struck him, and he jumped up to run to the nearest dormer window. The floorboards where the sun had laid on them warm under his bare feet, but no freeway, no factories. The window looked out over Water Street, skirting the edge of the Potomac banks. And there below Chris's amazed eyes rose a forest of mastheads, spars of ships at anchor along the shore. Water Street below him was swarming with activity, but not the activity that Chris had previously known. Men dressed in the same sort of clothes as those laid out for him, pushed at cotton bales, rolled hogsheads along to the docks, or rowed out to ships anchored in the midstream. Most of the stevedores were hatless, and Chris snickered at the sight of the short braid of hair at the napes of their necks. Many were brilliant scarves tied around their heads, red or mustard, yellow or green, and the sound of deep voices, swearing, laughing, or raising an unfamiliar sea shanties, excited Chris and sent the blood tingling along his veins. He rushed to the high-placed window overlooking Wisconsin Avenue. No key bridge was to be seen in the distance, only stretches of fields and orchards scattered with occasional houses of russet brick. And when he craned his neck, there was the end where the People's Drugstore ought to be, the sign swinging high above the road, Wisconsin Avenue. Chris had to laugh. If it could see itself only a wide muddy road full of ruts and puddles along which someone's line of geese was waddling, impervious to the cursing of passing carters and riders on horseback. A little below him, Chris could see the two old warehouses he remembered from the night before, but now they looked quite new. Their bricks bright, and their walls solid. Barrels were being lifted by the winch and tackle into the upper loft. And Chris watched the busy scene for quite some time. His rolling stomach and a simultaneous smell of food reminded him of his hunger. Dressing quickly in the strange new clothes, he opened the door and peered outside. His bedroom door was at the top of a narrow curling stair that twisted away to the left out of sight. It was steep, and Chris stood silent and intent on the top step, listening. A deep woman's voice, loudly singing for well in a due-to-use Spanish ladies, came rolling up the stairwell to the accompaniment of a brisk clatter of pots and pans. What rose also to Chris's nostrils was a smell of newly baked bread, frying bacon, and wood smoke. And the combination put an end to his indecision for a while. He decided to call a truce to any attempt at solving the mystery in which he found himself. And following his nose, went softly down the stairs, rounding the last turn of the staircase. Chris remained in its shadow while he stared with unbelieving eyes at the Roman figure before him. If this was a dream, he said in himself, it's the best one I've ever had. The very best. What confronted Chris was Mr. Wicker's kitchen. This room took up almost all of the side wing of the house across from Chris. Two casement windows showed the shrubs and flowers and white picket fence of Mr. Wicker's garden. And at his left was the back door opening onto Water Street, flanked by two smaller windows. These seemed most inviting, each possessing a window seat from which one could watch the busy comings and goings of the docks with a view of the ships beyond. But what drew Chris's eyes and made them grow round with wonder was the extraordinary figure in front of the fireplace. The vast, deeply set fireplace was in the wall that faced the back door so deep. It was that there was even a bench on one side of it. And over the smoking logs were hung all manner of trivet spits and cooking irons. It wasn't short a fireplace such as Chris had never dreamed of, yet the tall buxom woman stirring the hissing pots and singing to herself was what held Chris rooted to the last step of the attic. Stare. The woman stood easily, 6 feet broad and brawny enough to be a match for almost any man. Countless yards of sprigs. Cotton must have gone into the making of her dress, to say nothing of her apron. A massive fichu of freshly laundered muslin went around her neck and was tucked into her bodice. A white turban was on her head, but on top of the turban, Chris simply could not believe his eyes as he counted rapidly. On top of this amazing woman's head was a gigantic hat supporting 24 roses and 12 waving black plumes. Chris's jaw dropped at the sight of the turban. Had it had the flowers bobbing and swaying, the ostrich plumes blowing and curtsying with every slightest movement, as if blissfully unaware that her costume was not the usual one for cooking. The woman hummed and stirred, tasted and hung up her ladle. But the sight was too much for Chris before he could stop it. A shout of laughter exploded from his lips. He laughed, and the indignant expression on the woman's face when she turned to stand glaring at him with her hands on her jetting hips only added to Chris's laughter, at last sobering up somewhat as he realized that his behavior was rude, to put it mildly. Chris stopped and caught his breath, shaking only now and again by a diminishing paroxysm, seeing the spark of bad temper in the red face of the enormous woman. Chris decided to pour oil on the troubled waters. Good morning, ma'am. I'm Chris Mason from upstairs, and I'm sorry I laughed so loud. He floundered and grabbed desperately at any passing idea. I saw something comical out the window there. He pointed wildly, and it just set me off. I hope I didn't disturb you. Qualified though. Not entirely. The woman accepted this effort at peacemaking, and her face eased a little. Well now, so where you are awake at the last day and hungry being a boy. I don't doubt. She moved to the dresser and took down a mug and played the roses and ostrich plumes, nodding in evident agreement. So you are Chris. Did you say Christopher? That would be, and I am Mistress Rebecca Boozer. Should you be wanting to know Becky Boozer? They call me. She bustled over to a covered bowl, dipped out creamy milk with a long-handled dipper, and set bread, butter, and bacon in front of Chris at a table, pulled up to one of the window seats. Heat up. Now, young man, Becky Boozer advised, every red rose and feather accenting her words for Mr. Wicker. We'll be wanting to see you when you have done. It's late past state of the clock. She glanced out the window. It might be just possible that Master Silly will be passing before long for a mid-morning snack. And here I am gossiping with you. Instead of getting on with my work, Chris etched with a will, looking around as he chewed the spotless brick floor and the starched curtains at the windows. The shining copper pans hung beside the huge fireplace were proof of Becky Boozer's housekeeping. Don't you have an ice box? Chris asked, his mouth full. What may that be? Becky asked sharply. To keep the food cool, Chris answered. Becky stopped to consider this, her hands on her hips. We have a larger on the cool side of the house. If that be what you mean, she told him, nodding. Keeps the food pretty well up to April or May. Then the heat makes everything go. Oh, this heat. Prosperity, Maryland, where I come from, and on the seacoast, as it is, was never like this. A table with a wooden tub and dishes stacked nearby caught Chris's eye. Buckets of water stood beneath the table. And presently Becky Boozer took off a small pot of steaming water from the hook above the fire, poured it in the tub, and dipped cold water from one of the buckets into it. What a system, Chris thought, as he watched Becky busy with their dishes, thinking of the neat white kitchen he knew at home aloud. He said, if you had a little wooden trough that led from that tub out through the window there, you could pull out a bung when you were ready and the water would run outdoors. It would save you carrying that great tub about when you're in a hurry. Becky Boozer rested her soapy hands on the edge of the tub and looked at him admiringly over her shoulder. I would never have thought it, she said. By the look of your never in this world, you have brains, young lad. That's what you have, a better idea than that. I never heard. Indeed. It is just what I have been in needing since years, and that's simple. I might have thought it out myself. I shall set Mr. Silly to work on it. When he comes, he's right handy with tools, is Ned Silly. At this moment, a short knock sounded on the back door, and an instant change came over Becky Boozer. It was impossible to imagine that anyone as ponderous as Becky could be coy. But at the sound of the knock, this is what she became, wiping her hands hastily on one of many petticoats. She pushed and pulled at her hat, which remained immovable, straightened her fichu, and smoothing her dress. She minced a huge bolt to the door with a welcoming smile. A little man, scarcely higher than Becky's barrel waist with a rolling seagate and twinkling blue eyes bounced into the room and strained up on tiptoe towards Muz. Boozer's blushing cheek. Chris behind the open door had not yet been perceived. Come now, Becky may love, shouted Silly the sailor in a good humor. Or how can I start the day? Right. That to kiss from my boozer. Becky blushed and simmered and cast down her eyes. And get along with your silly. What a way to behave, she admonished, delighted and abashed. See, there's company here. She pushed her suitor off with an elephantine shove and gestured to Chris. Chris was feeling the contagion of laughter catching up with him again at the scene he had watched and was glad when the sailor turned and came over to where he sat, a visitor, a well off a ship. No, no, Becky put in quickly and gave Chris a look. No, he is a friend of the master's from, she searched her mind, from another part of the country. He got here last night and slept late. As you see, indeed. And indeed, said the sailor, settling himself comfortably. And as if for a long stay in his chair and observing Chris through his keen blue eyes. Well, young man, he announced genially. I am Silly, he said and stretched out a hard brown hand. Christopher Mason, Chris said in return, and they solemnly shook hands, taking account of each other as men do when they meet. I shall sit here, Mr. Specie, by your leave. Silly called out as if Becky Boozer were a mile away to keep the sled company, as it were. So you shall, Becky answered warmly, smiling broadly, wrinkles of pleasure at the corners of her eyes, and could attempt to with a morsel master Silly that Silly appeared to consider this invitation from all sides before he gave his reply, cocking his head on one side, like a parrot, as he reflected. Finally, he answered, how could I refuse when I know you're famous a cook? He said with a smile at Becky and a wink at Chris, and put his honey forefinger and thumb the distance of a thread apart. But a crumb, Mr. Specie, a morsel, a taste, just pay my respects to your art. As it were, then such a commotion took place in the kitchen. Chris watched flabbergasted as Becky set before Silly of beet pie, a large cheese, fruit preserves, 2 kinds of bread, cakes and cookies, lattice tarts and pickles and jars. And with a beaming smile, Becky drew from a cask a jug full of whale, which she sat down on the table with a thud. Just a morsel, Master Silly, she said, adding in a coaxing tone, try just to taste to please me next. Silly, his eyes winking with anticipation and smacking his lips, attacked the meat pie and the cheese tarts and pickles with a will. Here, try this, he urged Chris, heaping. The boys played as lavishly as his own, and the two ate in silence and gusto, while Becky stood by with roses and feathers bobbing. You must keep your strength up, Ned Silly, she admonishes, for 'tis a hard life that you lead, she warned him. Ned paused long enough to swallow. Aye, that it is, he agreed, wagging his head, champing his jaws and digging into the food. A hard life has a sailor, Ned said with an effort at sorrow, which failed signally. And he took a great draught of the ale. After a while, Silly slowed, wiped his mouth with his hand and leaned back in his chair, rolling a dazed eye at the anxious face of the weighing. Becky Boozer, Mistress Boozer, he announced, I am a new man. He heaved a sigh of repletion. You have saved me again. Ah, Mr. Becky, what a treasure. You are. Becky curtsied and giggled, her fabulous hat shaking as if with a secret all its own. Just then a bell tinkled at the end of the kitchen passage. That will be the master, Becky said, bustling away. Then she turned. I shall be back, Master Silly. I pray you do not leave. Chris seized his opportunity. Please, Master Silly, he asked, leaning across the empty plates in his interest. Why does she wear that hat, Master Silly? Cocktail. And I at the boy before him picked comfortably at his teeth with an iron nail, which he took from his pocket and loosened his belt buckle. Ah, he said, so you've not heard? Quick. Then I shall tell you, for that is truly a tale. The sailor stretched back in his chair, one hand holding the mug of ale. His short nose and red windburned cheeks seemed to share the joke with his eyes as he finally leaned forward across the table with an air of conspiracy. End of chapter 4, recording by Patty Cunningham.